All right, looks like we're live. Vanessa?
Yes.
All right, so I'll call the Board of Selectmen meeting May 19th, 6:30 PM to order. All selectmen are present. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, General Law, Chapter 38, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15th, 2020 order imposing strict limitation on the number of people that may gather in one place. This meeting of the Southborough Board of Selectmen will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and/or parties with a right and/or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the Town of Southborough's website, www.southboroughtown.com. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch or participate in the meeting may do so in the following manner: by finding the meeting at www.southboroughtown.com/remote meetings. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event that we are unable to do so, despite best efforts, we will post on Southborough's website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. Again, the meeting is in order. Our scheduled appointments first is volunteer interview for Historical Commission for appointment through June 30th, 2022, James Blaschke. And I will apologize if I mispronounce the last name. Is Mr. Blaschke here, Mark? Do you know?
Oh, I'm looking at the attendees list and there is, oh yes, Mr. Blaschke just arrived.
Okay,
Yes.
there he is.
Jim, can you hear us okay?
I hear you fine. Do you hear me?
Yes.
And can you see me?
We cannot see you.
Let me see if the camera is obscured. Bear with me a second. Camera's open. I'm looking for a control to turn on video.
Maybe towards the lower left-hand side of your screen.
It's showing me all kinds of speaker controls, but nothing for video. Hang on a minute.
Is there a word that says stop video with a red slash through it?
No, not at all.
No? All right.
It says we're recording and I'm speaking, which is goodness. Hang on a minute. No. Let me see if I can find this. I apologize.
No worries.
I've done lots of Zoom meetings and there's always a little camera indicator to turn it on, which I don't see. Let me keep trying here. Video. I can see myself on video.
Okay.
Not sure why. It's not allowing me to share it with you.
Okay. So this
All right,
is
let's
only a
proceed.
joke,
You
but
are
I'm
Brian.
glad you didn't apply for the Municipal Technology Committee.
You know, I've only got a 45-year career in technology, so I'm not qualified for any of that. But I've
It's only a joke. No,
never been an IT support guy, so
no offense intended, just a joke.
I
But
know.
so,
I apologize. I'll keep poking around while we're doing this.
all right. So welcome and thank you for volunteering for this commission. I know this group has had a number of vacancies over the last few years, so it's good to see interest for people that want to join. I'm wondering if you could just give us a 2-minute spiel on yourself and why you're interested in joining the Historical Commission.
Sure. Thank you. Well, it's nice to meet you all virtually. And I'm Jim Blaschke. I've been a resident of Southborough now 20 years. Before that, Sudbury, Massachusetts, originally from California. As I mentioned, a 45-year career in technology, engineering background initially, then marketing and sales. Over the course of the years, been a founding member of 5 startups. But the short answer, the short summary of all of that is it's a go, go, go type of career up until when I retired, which was a year ago, January. And I began to look for ways to give back to the community. I had not been active really in Southborough up until that time. And so last year in the fourth quarter began participating in the Historical Society. I knew of the commission from the discussions that had gone on there. And then when in discussions with Joe and others, I realized that there was a vacancy. And in fact, he was looking to step down. I put my hand up and said, I'd like to serve. So I enjoy the town very much. As I say, I've been an absentee resident quite a bit because I've traveled every week with well over 100,000 miles a year. But now that I'm retired, it's been nice to just, get reestablished, if you will, with a lot of home projects, but also give back a little bit.
Okay. Sounds great. Just one quick question for me. Have you had the opportunity to attend any commission meetings yet? Or I know they've probably had a limited number due to the what's going on currently, but I'm just curious if you have been able to join their meetings yet.
I'm here now.
Hi, Jim, good to see you.
Can you hear me? It says I'm muted.
No, well, I can hear you.
Great.
And
Can see you.
can see you as well.
Likewise. So anyway, that was the short summary. It's basically a very busy technology career, but retired and want to get back.
Okay. And have you had the opportunity to attend any commission meetings as yet?
Just one. The one when Joe announced that he wanted to step down, and I was nominated to join. But I've been in the Historical Society, as I mentioned, not the same thing by any means, but been part of them since fourth quarter last year.
Okay. Very good. Other members with questions?
Quick question, if I may.
Mr.
Sure.
Stivers.
Hi, Sam.
Jim, again, thank you for volunteering for this. I think this is a pretty interesting position. Are there any particular areas or projects that you're focused on or see opportunity to push hard on if you're appointed to the commission?
Well, no, as I understand it, and again, this may be grossly understating the responsibilities, the primary role is to just review applications for demolition and for, to determine what needs to be conserved from a historic perspective. But no, none of the current town proposals or resident proposals, and that's primarily just ignorance. I don't have any that are high on my radar that I'm particularly an advocate of or have a strong opinion about. I just want to, evaluate, evenly and fair-handedly and do, contribute as I can.
Thanks.
Other questions? Mr. Kalenda.
So Jim, welcome. How do you balance the, for instance, on that you brought up the demolition delay bylaw. How do you balance, say, the wants and needs of a property owner with maybe your own personal or the commission's own personal interest in maintaining something that the owner, can't financially maintain or just doesn't want to maintain it anymore? How do you strike? What kind of balance do you strike there? Or is there a balance? Is it, all to the commission, nothing to the owner, all to the owner, nothing to the commission? How do you strike that balance when you may invariably come across, that conflict?
That's a great question. And I think I'd have to answer it a little out of ignorance because I've not participated in those discussions yet and understood the various trade-offs. However, as a philosophy, and as a homeowner 20 years here in Southborough, and the person that's added on, and improved value of my own property, it's not historic by any means, it's a little over 20 years old. I think I'd start with the principle of fairness and look at what are the trade-offs between what the homeowner wants to do and what the commission's bylaws would call for in terms of property preservation. And I'm also a big believer in negotiation. I don't know if adjudication or resolving a difference of opinion is possible, or if the code is so watertight, if you will, that there's no give. So I'm speaking again out of complete ignorance, Dan, but I would say I'd be looking at it from a principle of fairness and what are the right ways to reach a settlement, if you will, or an approach that works for both. Because again, I'm a strong believer in personal property ownership and the ability to enjoy what you created and all of that. When it comes to sale of a residence or a building or a structure that's historic, there's I'm sure ways to think about how to make it work for both sides. And again, that's a bit of a uninformed, optimistic point of view, but the one principle that comes to mind is trying to be as fair as you can, but certainly not biased one way or the other. And I hope that's in
Yeah,
single.
that's an excellent answer, Jim. I only have one more question, Brian, if I may.
Go ahead.
So, Jim, does everything that is historic need to be maintained, or is there a balance there also? For instance, if there's a barn on a part of town that is just fallen down and, but it's historic because it's been around a long time and it, is that something, does everything have to be maintained, or is there some fiscal responsibility that comes into the equation as well?
Well, I think fiscal and reasonable too. Just because it's an old crumbling structure, I would assume that if there's a crumbling structure, there's no one caring after it, or if there's someone owns it, and obviously someone does, but there's no motivation to update it or restore it. So I don't think, again, in principle, and again, as a newcomer in all this, I don't think that there's a hard over requirement to save every single stick that's out there from a, historic point of view. But if there's some significance to the property, if it's got some history, if it's meaningful in some way, then maybe there's an additional reason to pursue the owners finding someone to co-invest or maybe sell it to someone who will preserve it as a historic element. So again, I think it's probably a whole picture view of why the building is in disrepair and not had any investment in it, and is there some reasons behind it other than the fact that it's just old? Because probably just old is not an adequate reason unless there's some underlying factor.
Thank you, Jim.
Okay.
Mr. Shea, if I may?
Yes, Ms. Brascio.
Thank you. Mr. Purple, I don't know if you know the answer to this, but did we get any a recommendation or anything? Has Historical had the opportunity to meet, and have we heard anything from them?
My understanding, there was a letter sent from Mr. Hubley supporting Mr. Blaschke's candidacy. However, we were unable to find it. I know Ms. Esposito reached back out to Mr. Hubley, and I don't believe that connection was made, but I have been informed that there was that letter. I just do not have it.
Perfect. Thank you. Hi, Jim. Thank you for stepping forward. It's always great to have new people want to get involved and volunteer. I think you'll be a great addition. I will just add for the board as well, you're a very talented musician. So
she has personal knowledge of an annual event around here.
That's always appreciated, when duty calls, but thank you for stepping forward. I think you will be a great addition to the board.
Thank you very much for your endorsement. Appreciate it.
Mr. Healy.
Yeah. Hi, Mr. Blaschke. How are you doing?
Very well, Mark.
Nice, thoughtful answers to the questions you've been asked. My one comment is, somebody who started 5 businesses, I suspect you have some initiative. And one of the nice things about being involved in committees generally in a small town, and Southborough still qualifies for that, is that you have wide berth, and there's an awful lot of things over the years that the Historical Commission has done, whether it's to advise on projects, to identify things that are historic that we didn't realize were historic, to identify avenues that the town could pursue in terms of initiatives, sometimes property acquisition, sometimes fashioning development and the like. So I encourage you to use that initiative that I suspect you've developed over these years and do what you can at the Historical Commission. It's a good group.
Well, thank you very much. I agree with the corollary in that starting a small business is like operating in a small committee with limited resources, obviously, but you have to be creative and you have to be resourceful and take, not just be passive about what you see around you and be proactive to sort out things and come up with answers that work and fix what you can't, if something doesn't work well, fix it, move on. That's why I put that part in my application, is that there's a certain interest I have, and I think over the years I became genetically unsuited to work for large corporations. So there's a certain spunk that you have to have when you start a business and try and figure things out along the way and be creative and invent things that don't exist for that particular enterprise. And so that I thought might be useful, and that's certainly my approach to anything in life really is if it's a problem, let's sort it out. Let's not just, worry that, we're stuck now. The virus is something I have to wait for to get sorted out. But generally speaking, with events you can, make an impact on, there's an answer you can find.
Very good. Any other questions, comments?
Nope.
Very good. I will move then to appoint Jim Blaschke to the Historical Commission to the term ending June 30th, 2022.
Second.
Move seconded. Ms. Braccio,
Braccio, aye.
Mr. Healy,
Healy, aye.
Mr. Kalenda,
Kalenda, aye.
Mr. Shea is an aye. Mr. Stivers.
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Congratulations, Jim.
Congratulations.
So the town clerk will reach out to you with information to complete the appointment, and we look forward to having you join that group.
As long as I don't have to sign over my firstborn, I'm good.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you all very much. It's a pleasure to
All
see
right.
you.
Take care, Jim.
Looking forward.
Thank you, Jim.
Next item, Mr. Stearns again with an update on Memorial Day observance. Brian, you there?
I am. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, great.
Thank
Can
you
you
for joining us? Oop. There he is. Brian, you're on mute now, it looks like.
There we go.
There we go. You even have us on video.
All
Excellent.
right.
Thank you for joining us again.
Well, thank
Can you
you.
give us an update on what's in store for this coming weekend?
Absolutely. Good evening, and thanks for having me back. We've been busy. There's a lot going on. We're conducting the flags in ceremony this Saturday afternoon, evening. We're doing all the cemeteries, putting the flags in, replacing all the burial flags on the graves. That'll be done on the 23rd. Representative Dykema has produced a Memorial Day message on Sam TV. I'm not sure if anybody's seen that yet. Great message. She did a great job on that. Ms. Hale has coordinated the group of church bell ringing. Thank you, Ms. Hale, for that. It's going to be around 10:30 on Memorial Day. We're trying to get it to be a 21 gun salute, 21 bells, if that's possible. I'm not sure. Would you like to give us an update on that, Ms. Hale?
Yep, we're still working on that to confirm all those details. We have heard back from St. Anne's, St. Mark's, and St. Matthew's. Pilgrim was checking with their staff as well as the community church. So we have at least 3 lined up. So we're still waiting for confirmation on the others.
And I think that's great. I mean, to come forward like that and do that for us, for the whole community, it's a wonderful addition to the Memorial Day ceremonies, especially this year where we have a very limited ceremony. Speaking of the ceremony, Mr. Wynot, of course, is organizing the small contingent along with another group plus Mr. Kalenda, I believe. Are you there? Yes.
Yes.
And that's a small contingent of veterans, and that's going to be conducted at about 10 o'clock, and it's going to be about 20 minutes long. Then at 10:20, 10:25, then there'll be, well, the ceremony will be over, but the bell ringing will start at around 10:30. Is that correct, Ms. Hale?
Yes, it is.
And this is all going to be recorded. And I'll tell you, I really want to thank everyone for their coordinated efforts on this, because in this year has been kind of crazy. A lot of towns aren't doing anything. Some towns are doing something, but I think Southborough has really stepped up to do more than a lot of the other towns around, and still keep it appropriate and keep it non-public, but viewable through Sam TV and everything. It's an honor to have a dedicated group of people who understand and appreciate that. And I'm honored to be a part of that. So, and that's about it, if anybody has any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Stearns?
I do not. Great stuff, Mr. Stearns. Appreciate it.
No, again, I'll
Brian.
echo that. Appreciate all your efforts, and just very, very glad that we are able to, have some sort of observance for this day, and appreciate all the efforts that you and so many others have put into this.
It is a group effort, and I appreciate everybody's effort coming forward with what we could do. So it's always a team effort, and without everybody doing their part and extra, then it wouldn't happen. So thank you.
Brian, if I may.
Yes, Lisa.
Hi, Brian. Thank you for coming and thank you for all you're doing. Maybe if we can just take a second in case there's any public watching, that they understand that this is really a small veterans only basically event, and that we're asking that the public support you, but by not attending. Is that fair to say? I just don't know if you or Dan want to touch on that, as much as we'd love to have everybody
So,
come.
unfortunately, that is very fair to say this year. And, our crowds have kind of getting bigger over time, and which has really been nice to see. This year we can't have any. And so, I mean, there were some great ideas that some citizens put out there about doing a car parade and, past the memorial and whatnot. We can't do things like that, but next year we hope to have it come and have those crowds back in full order. But this time it'll be a little bit different. Absolute kudos to Vanessa as well for organizing the bell ringing. I hope that works out. That'll be a really nice touch. And Brian, for you, for getting, coordinating with the state and other towns as to what, really is appropriate. I mean, we had other ideas too of what might be able to work. This very limited event, I think, is going to be something that is, honors our war dead, but also, understands the era that we're in, and make sure that, even our veterans are going to march at least 6 feet apart. So we'll be fine.
Well said. Thank you, Dan.
And Brian, you had mentioned that it's going to be recorded. I presume that Southborough Access Media will be the group that does the
Yes, sir.
recording?
Yes, sir, that's correct. And
Okay, so-
I would just like to say also, people at home, they can watch it on TV, and we still want them to participate in their homes. They can fly their flag at their home at half staff up until noon. They can put a wreath out, and they can just do a silent remembrance for their own, as well as all of ours.
Very good. So
Thank
for
you, Brian.
those, who are watching and plan to watch it, Southborough Access Media's local channel 37, I believe, on Verizon. Anyways, I forget what it is on Charter. But that's where you can look for the recordings of the ceremonies as they record every year. So happy to, and thanks to them for stepping up as well to assist. Any other questions, comments?
Just thank you, Brian.
Thank you all. I appreciate it very much.
Very good. Thanks for joining us, Brian. Appreciate it.
Have a good evening.
Thanks. Next appointment is Mark Petrowitz, Assabet School Committee Rep. Mark, if you're in the attendees group, could you raise your hand? Bingo. Okay. So can we move Mark over? I didn't realize that's how you spelled Petrowitz. We're just looking at the strange assortment of letters and numbers.
There's a
Mark,
fair with an O instead of an E. I don't know which one's correct.
Okay.
Encrypted.
I'm not sure how to add my audio. I'm kind of in the same boat with the other gentleman. I'm trying here.
Mark, did we lose you?
Still on mute now.
Yeah, Mark, if you can hear us, you're on mute.
Okay, let me see.
There we go. I can see you now.
Still on mute, but video on.
There he is.
There we go.
All right, very good, Mark.
Thank you. I apologize for that. Thank you, everyone. It's good to speak to you all. Just to give you a little bit of background, I engaged with the board back late August, early September last year when there was an opening for the Southborough seat at Aspet Valley Regional Technical High School Board. I believe the person who was sitting on the board could not continue. So there was an opening. I did apply. We had an application process. We had an interview with Board of Selectmen and the Southborough School Board, and I was fortunately appointed. So I want to thank the board for their confidence in me. And throughout the year, it's certainly been the most interesting year to be on a school board ever. That's for sure. It's been a challenge for the school, but I will say personally, it's been very rewarding, very enriching. We have conducted a meeting once a month since September, and also had a few executive sessions here or there. But just a few highlights about the year. We just settled on a new 5-year busing contract last meeting with NRT. There were two companies that vied, NRT and First Student. NRT won the bid. That was taken care of. We also settled on the union health insurance contract with Fallon Community Health Plan. That increase was 9.99%, and that was voted on and settled. So that's a few highlights. Obviously, the difficulties everyone has had with the virus, and it's been a bigger challenge for a regional technical high school more so than a high school. It's a complicated process for any school, but when you've got a hands-on environment like a trade school, it's twice as complicated. And even more so for our seniors, our graduating seniors who need to get their hours in for their certification in their various areas, their concentrations. So we do not actually at this point have anything from the governor or from DESE as far as explicitly how those requirements will be met, but that is an ongoing question. So also the 2021 budget was finalized, and I met with Mark Purple and Ernest Poole at the school back in, it was early December. We had a good discussion. I don't know if Mark had any thoughts or questions about the budget itself. Certainly here to discuss that. And a couple things I just wanted to mention is one of my main goals has been on increasing the visibility of the school, realizing it's a viable alternative for Southborough residents. One of the first things that did work for me was to invite them to Heritage Day this past year. For the first time ever, Aspet Valley, that I know of, Aspet Valley was present, and the principal, Mark Holik, was blown away by the number of people he got to meet. Create a lot of positive buzz. The current enrollment for Southborough residents in the school is 21 students. 10 are in 9th grade, 3 are in 10th, 6 are in 11th, and 2 are in 12th. To see that 10 in 9th grade is very encouraging. I don't have the numbers yet for as far as students who will be incoming this year. There is an application process, but I know there was a lot of increased interest. I believe that's all I had to discuss at this point. Now I know my seat technically expired. I believe it was on the 12th of this month, and I understand that I will be grandfathered in until the election. As we know, the election was postponed. Now my name is not on the ballot. I've already received my ballot and entered it in because I did not get my number of signatures in time, and when I did try to get them, we were already in the middle of the whole virus. Nobody would answer the door. So I did understand that I could conduct a write-in campaign, which I started, keeping it small. I don't think there's really anyone else interested in the position, at least not that I'm aware of. So I'm hoping through the vote, through the write-in campaign, that I can prevail and continue for the next 4 years. So I'll open it up for questions.
Very good. Thank you for that update, Mark. And again, we've heard a lot from the Southborough K through 8 schools and Algonquin schools. So thank you very much for reaching out to provide us this update with Assabet as well. Any questions for Mark? Yes, Lisa. Yep.
Hi, Mark. Thank you for coming. I appreciate it. Thank you for addressing the, excuse me. Sorry about that. I guess he agrees with what I'm going to say. So thank you for addressing the requirement. That was one of the questions that I had. And I actually want you to take back to Assabet and thank them for the amazing job that they did on the golf course renovations on the building. That turned out tremendous. I mean, the decking and everything was just a fabulous job. So if you could share our thanks for that. And also, if you could just touch on, has Assabet come together with any of their plans for what they're looking to do for graduation for their seniors? I know you said we have 2 seniors this year.
There has been some discussion. What we were hoping to do actually was have a delayed graduation. There had been contact made with the DCU, which is where they've always held it, about maybe having something in the summertime. It would not be in the actual DCU itself where they've housed COVID patients. It would be in the other portion, which is the convention center. So there's been some active discussion about that, and at this point we don't have anything definitive. There's a campaign that they led to, they created signs for each of the seniors, and the staff went to each senior's house and posted a sign on it saying, you know, with the senior's name saying this is a graduating senior. So I think that was really important to bring up. It was a very positive move. And I think it shows the dedication of the staff there, you know, the administration and the teachers. So that was very positive. But yeah, as far as a lot of the things the seniors have lost, not only at Assabet, but at Algonquin, that's one of many. Very disappointing. So I will get back to you as soon as I hear more information, but there is some hope that they can have a graduation. I mean, it is a graduating class of 1,200 students overall, and it would be nice for them to receive some recognition.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other comments, questions? Mr. Stivers.
Mark, thank you for that summary. Great job. We had a good chance to talk with you when the initial appointment period last year. So I don't have any additional questions for you, but I wanted to say I appreciate your efforts to raise visibility for Assabet. I think it's a great educational resource that has been underutilized historically. And it certainly sounds like you're adding a lot of energy to that communication process. And I think that's a real benefit for the town. So I appreciate that effort and urge you to keep going on that. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the kudos, and it is something I feel extremely passionate about. We have a jewel not far away, and that I think could be utilized quite a bit more. I think there's probably a couple issues. One is visibility. Really hasn't received the notoriety that the local schools or that Algonquin has received. I think there's also kind of a built-in stigma against trade schools, which I actually had myself growing up. I mean, it was I think the attitude was you either went to high school to move on to college or you went to trade school. You know, first of all, if you don't go to college these days and you go to trade school, you're in great shape, as we've seen. But also, I think the other part of that is that these schools do prepare students to attend college. There's the traditional program, you know, your math, your science, your humanities, and then there's also the trade component of it. So the students are prepared to go on to either a 2-year or 4-year college if they wish. And the other part of that is they're also being trained to go out into the work world. I think now is a great example of the time where I think there's a huge clamoring for students in some trades. Some trades obviously there's a problem. For example, culinary. You know, that's going to be a real challenge. But on the other end, I've seen it, you know, with HVAC and things in that regard. I think there's even bigger demand. So it's kind of getting past the stigma a little bit. It's explaining to the students really to get them excited, and then to calm parents' nerves and say this is a great alternative. Come see the school, come check it out, and realize that this is a great alternative. And you're not losing anything by attending. If anything, you're gaining.
Yep.
I think quite a broad understanding. The students that go to the school want to be there. There's no way around that. When you talk to them, it's very clear. Another minor thing, which is not minor for some people, is there are sports programs. That's another thing people don't realize. And on top of that, they have a no-cut policy. So I think a lot of students don't realize there's basketball, there's football, there's hockey. And my understanding is there's so many kids going out for both the hockey and the basketball teams, they barely have enough room to put them on. So I see a lot of engagement, a lot of excitement. It's incredibly positive. And I will also say that the meetings themselves are a joy to go to. They're administered very well. We get done what we need to get done. The onboarding process, I actually was appointed probably 2 days before my first meeting. And I was called in by Ernest Fool and by Virginia Sims, who is the chairwoman. And we had about an hour and a half onboarding. And that was the best thing they could have done, because when I walked into that meeting the next night, I was pretty well prepared. I mean, of course, it takes time to learn, but I wasn't lost. And then the other part about that was we had I attended my first Mass Association of School Committees meeting, which held down at Cape Cod in November. I attended that meeting, 3 days of workshops and events and meetings. And I also was accredited, so I'm fully ready to go. And if I'm elected again, that whole process is taken care of. So that's an additional bonus.
Thank you. I'd point out there's a practical economic reason that Assabet ought to be popular too. Is I think my plumber now has a higher annual income than my doctor does, as a matter of fact. So real opportunity there.
It's a great opportunity. That's the part I try to explain to people. If you could go through this program and have no debt when you come out. It's a program that's there for you. And on top of that, the busing is included. That's the other part of this that maybe a lot of residents don't realize, is that the school is required to provide busing. It's probably a little bit closer than Algonquin as far as I can figure, but the students are bused there. So it's a great alternative. And you said, a plumber is a great example, but there's 17 programs within the school. And there's something for each person. Some kids are interested in cosmetology. Some kids are interested in drafting. The auto collision program is extremely popular. So to me, it can play to each student's strengths, and that's what's important. And that's, I think, maybe the thing that sometimes gets lost, is what are the strengths of the students? What do they want? They need to be the ones motivated to go to school every day. And I think this school provides that. So,
Good. Thank you.
thank you.
Very good. Other questions, comments?
Just an observation. Hi, Marty Healy. Assabet has a very effective and enthusiastic advocate for themselves. And the 9 kids from Southborough in the freshman class, I don't think I've ever heard a number that high for an individual class at Assabet. So somebody's doing something right. So good luck in your re-election campaign.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, there are assessments that are occurred to the towns, Southborough being one of the towns. And I think the point I made to Mark Purple was, maybe sometimes you don't always want to hear me say this, but I want as many Southborough residents attending the school as possible. He was extremely positive behind that comment also, because I do think it's a great investment by the town. And as Sam said, these students graduate, they start their own businesses, or they work for other local businesses. They're going to stay in Southborough. So it really is a win-win, I think.
Very good.
Thank you.
Mark, thank you for joining us. And again, thanks for reaching out to ask to come before us. Appreciate it.
Please contact me if anyone has any questions or wants any updates on anything in the near future.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck.
Thank
Very much,
Thank
Mark.
you.
Next under scheduled appointments, Brian Ballantyne, Finance Director, continued discussion on revised FY 2021 budget.
So I will Brian got to do all the talking last time. And so I'll start off tonight and then Brian can do all the talking to wrap things up. But I'm going to share my screen with you just to quickly walk through the PowerPoint presentation that I had sent out to the board earlier. Some of this you've seen before because this was the presentation that was given to you in April, updating where we were. Bless you, Sam. From the March presentation. So I'll walk through this quickly, and then we can start to have a conversation. So Vanessa needs to allow me to share my screen. Let's see. Screen one. Okay. So this is just a quick review. This is a revised FY21 budget that we had looked at. And if you recall back in March, we were all done. We were all set. The board had worked through the budget. Advisory had worked through the budget. Town meeting was going to have, the possibility of about 357,000 in capital articles, 2 bonded articles for projects for Corderville Hall as well as the townhouse windows. Advisory and selectmen were pretty much in agreement on budgets. There was one exception at that point, which I believe was the EDC budget. And there was about $260,000 in new positions and services, which I'm not going to go through and list. You could see them here. Essentially, it was I think it turned out to be just about 3.7 FTE, as well as benefits for 3 full-time employees, which is about $22,000 to $24,000 each. At that point, the estimated tax increase was about 3.13%. Impact on an average residence was $330. Excess levy capacity was about 2.9 million. And the operational increase for the town and school was split about 6%. Town was almost 8.5. School was just under 3% for an increase. So now let's turn to May. Here's where we are. And, we've made some reductions, from our local aid. Again, remember that this 3.5 number here is our fiscal 20 number that we have now, not the fiscal 21 number that the governor promised us when he filed his budget in January. That budget, that was $100,000 higher. It figures the year that we get the highest local aid increase that we've seen, we don't actually get that. So we're looking at a 3% reduction off of the FY20 number, about $155,000. We've also reduced our local receipts by about $165,000. That's our investment income. We were assuming that the hotel motel local meals tax would pass. We took that out. Excise, people probably aren't going to be buying as many new cars. We're not going to see increases there. So you're looking at about a decrease of about $325,000 in revenue. In terms of expenses, we deferred a significant amount of capital. And I do want to just kind of acknowledge the work of the capital committee. And I believe that I saw Mr. Malinowski, in the attendees room watching the meeting. And the capital committee and Ms. Cook have done, and the rest of the committee have done a very nice job with that. So we've deferred about $300,000 in capital. The K-8 assessment has been reduced by about $421,000. Regional school assessment's been reduced about $146,000. Treasurer collector has reduced his budget request by eliminating the part-time hours he was seeking. And Norfolk Agricultural, there's only actually 1 student when we thought it was going to be 2. So that's a little bit of a savings for us there. So when you roll that all up into the budget status, the estimated tax increase now is 0.85%, so just under 1%. The estimated residential average increase is about $89. And your excess levy capacity jumped up over $1 million to $3.9 million. Again, the operational increase, the variance between the town and the school has stayed similar in terms of the reductions. Sorry. And then, so just to take a look and something that I sent out to you previously, I just thought it was good to illustrate. Here is the updated 5-year levy capacity chart. So right now, as we sit, excuse me, in fiscal 20, we've got about $2.9 million in levy capacity. If the board votes a budget, this budget or similar to the budget that had been presented, you're going to have about $3.9 million in excess levy capacity. But look what happens in fiscal 22. You know, you are going to use approximately $2.8 million of excess levy capacity in order to support the budget that you have now. Now, part of that is another $1 million in capital in the capital plan as outlined. We're looking at a drop in some of the revenue items that Brian Ballantyne can speak to. And also you've got an increase in debt for the public safety facility, as well as Corderville Road project, which is planned in the capital plan. And you can see as things go from there. But I just want to point out to you again, 22, is going to be, a difficult year. And then you can see, we're going to use almost $1 million of excess levy capacity to get to fiscal 23. Now, the assumptions in here, and Brian Ballantyne can speak to this a little bit more, but the assumptions in here assume that we maintain certain amounts of revenue. We see certain increases. We see certain fiscal discipline on the expense side. Any of those things go out of whack, and that will affect these bottom line numbers. So this is where we sit as of now, without knowing what's going to happen in the recovery efforts that are going to happen with regard to the pandemic. So wanted to illustrate that to you. We did do the 2% and the 0% tax increase exercises with the departments. And I wanted to just share that with you, just the highlights. Again, in the exercise with the 2%, because that was where the board was focusing. We're looking at retaining, the out of positions hours for police, fire, youth and family services, council on aging and IT, about 3.7 full-time equivalent. There's the reductions in training, professional development, travel, elimination of the recording secretary for conservation. Schools are seeing reductions in their FTEs, both on the regional side and K-8. There are minor furloughs in several departments. And, there's an overall reduction of about 12,500 hours of staff time. 11,400 of that, is attributable to the school in those 5.5 FTE positions combined with K-8 and with the regional. Just something that you had seen previously, what do we have in reserves that we could use to help us? Well, quite honestly, not a lot. The reserve fund, is limited. It usually gets spent for the majority, by the end of the year. The current balance is just over $93,000 at this point from now until June. Stabilization fund, 2/3 vote for town meeting to expend. We've got just under $600,000 in that balance. 17 years ago, we had $3.5 million. And that was, that had been spent down. So we really don't have a lot of places to go in terms of funds, cash that's available to help us out, with our current situation. So tonight, I think the board just needs to, make sure that you're comfortable, with the proposed positions and hours for fiscal 21 with what you had looked at last Thursday, and make sure that you're solid where you are there. I'd ask again that the board consider taking a look at freezing the hiring for all new positions until January 1, 2021, when the revenue picture is more clear. We're not sure what the state is going to do to us or for us, and may not know that until late in July, early August, by the time we have a picture. And I would hate to start doing some hiring on July 1st, and then in October, we end up, having to let somebody go. Who may have left a position that they could have stayed in instead of coming here for something else, and now they're on unemployment. So to the extent we can avoid that, I think, we need to give, the board needs to provide itself a little flexibility. And then ultimately tonight, if, we get there, it'd be great if the board, adopts a revised fiscal 21 operational budget. Advisory is meeting on Thursday, and, you would provide them, I think, a clear roadmap as to where to go or where you intend to go, and then they can work from that. And then if there needs to be a separate meeting following advisory's meeting on Thursday, a joint meeting of the two boards in order to try and reconcile any differences so that we can go into town meeting, hopefully with a unified position. So that's all that I have for that. Now I will.
So tell you what, why don't you go back and leave that slide up? And let's just go through those next steps as a group. Where do we all come down on these? So, because I know.
Hey,
we
Brian, this
discussed-
is Marty.
Yep, go ahead, Marty.
Before we do that, and it's prompted by in between the break between our executive session and the start of this meeting, I looked at the My Southborough website, and there was an article about the schools, and it talked about Algonquin. And the way I read the article, and maybe Mark, you can either disabuse me of this notion, or maybe you've got more information than I do. But the way I read the article was that the regional school committee was meeting tomorrow night, that they have not yet come up with final budget figures, and that there might be additional reduction in their numbers. Am I wrong about that? Am I
So the school budget, so the regional school is meeting tomorrow night. The budget numbers that I am using are the numbers that the superintendent will be presenting to them as the recommendation. Okay, so the K-8 budget was voted last week. Okay, so school committee has already voted that budget. So the numbers that I'm using with the permission of the superintendent is the presentation that he's going to make, the recommended numbers that he goes with. So if things end up going lower, Marty, then that ends up, again, a positive impact.
Okay. I've got some other thoughts, but I'm happy to let other folks weigh in as well.
Anyone else with thoughts, I guess, before we address the next steps?
I'll wait and address the next steps. Thank you.
Okay. So I guess at this point, Marty, if you had other things you wanted to touch on, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess it's a timing thing. Mark, I hear you that it would be helpful on one track for advisory going into their meeting on Thursday night to have some clarity for exactly where we are. By the same token, I watched a decent amount of their last meeting, and the reason I did it is to kind of get an idea where they sat, and they didn't take any specific actions, at least not any significant actions. And I guess, we marched through a lot of the high dollar figures at our last meeting. I think for the most part, other than perhaps talking about the possibility of delaying the hiring to the middle of the year, which I think makes sense. Anything that provides flexibility makes sense. I think I'm of the mind that rather than trying to flesh things out around the edges of the remaining budget, that I'd kind of like to hear what advisory has to say. I know we've got another meeting, we've got another date that we have coming up. And I think I personally would be more comfortable hearing what they have to say on some of the items that we've already addressed, and finding out whether or not we're even on somewhat similar paths to address a final budget. Anyway, those are my thoughts.
Brian?
Go ahead, Sam.
Okay, comment. Marty, good point. And I've watched the advisory meetings as well. And I guess I'd observed that we actually last week spent a fair amount of time and effort going through point by point, talking about positions and voting on the numbers that are in the presentation here. And we did spend some time on delaying new positions, and again voted to, I think, go forward with the at least police and youth and family service one. So I'm not sure what we gained by revisiting all that stuff. And the new element, it could be advisory's position on certain pieces in here, which again, not totally clear to me at this point. So I'm not so interested in rehashing what we've already hashed several times now, as opposed to getting some new input and then trying to lock it down.
I wasn't suggesting going back over stuff. I was suggesting with not addressing at the edges some of the other stuff until we hear where advisory stands on some of the larger items that we've addressed.
Okay.
Brian, if I may?
Go ahead, Lisa.
I would actually like to take a few minutes and go over the additions that we had. I have a couple comments I'd like to make on it, and I have a request I'd like to make of the board. So I know, Sam, you're comfortable with the decisions we made and the discussions we had, and I don't want to rehash it, but I think it's important as we sit today, looking at Northborough's furloughing people. I had read today, Framingham's furloughing people. I would just like to even take 10 minutes and just rediscuss this. I mean, I'm looking at the schools are actually letting people go in their budget as well. I think K-8 was 3, Algonquin's 2.5, plus they're looking to restructure some. So I think we need flexibility going forward. And I don't want to add a position that we may have to lose, especially looking at the outlook for going ahead. So based on that, I guess I'm just going to make my comments because I've kind of moved ahead with it anyway. So I think that we have departments within the town that, based on the governor's guidelines and things that are happening itself when the town can actually open, I think we can utilize some of the employees that we have to possibly fill some of these spots. I'd like to relook at youth and family as one. I have thought a lot about it, and I think we're cutting hours in other places, and not that there's not a need. We've put off 2 police officers until January so we could take a better look at what the budget's going to be. So this is one budget in particular that I would like to personally, I would like to see put off until the fall, if not January 1st, and be able to utilize during this time some of the employees that we have that have skill set that might be useful. Also, we don't know when they're going to be live going back in the office. And one of the discussions we had was, it was about having somebody be at the desk when people come in. That's not happening at this point. As well as, there's a new referral service that they're able to use right now. So I think we need some additional flexibility as we move forward in this budget as well. I mean, we can adjust it. We can set it with a January 1st date to be able to review it. I just have some of these concerns, and I'd like to know what everybody else thinks.
So Brian, I'm happy to go.
Go ahead, Dan.
So I'm very comfortable with what we all discussed and voted upon last meeting. I think we need to move forward as we voted for with the hire for police and the hire for youth and family, as well as the part-time in the under Tom's team. So I think I heard that Marty's not looking to revisit. I think I heard that Sam is not looking to revisit. I don't know what's changed since our last meeting. There may be people that Lisa's identified that have some skill sets that want to maybe apply for those new roles, which is great. I don't know that I want to wait on anything in hopes that there might be someone who wants to apply for a new role that, so anyway, I'm continue to be an advocate for police and youth and family. They've needed these positions. Clearly those positions can benefit our residents during this time of need. We've cut other areas, and those are the 2 that we agreed last time to add, and I'm sticking with it.
Hey, Dan, just so my position's clear, again, the positions, the new positions, I voted against all of them last week, except for the
Yeah, I remember.
the new police positions and putting them in January. And I think what I said
I heard
earlier,
you say you didn't want to revisit.
the adding the new positions, but what I did say is that I think I would be in favor of putting off the position starting until January. If I wasn't clear about that, I apologize. I don't want to rehash the positions overall and take them out. That's not a battle. I fought that battle last week. I'm not interested in fighting it again, but I agree with Mark's point, reinforced by Lisa's point, that the flexibility of starting those positions in January is a plus. So just, again, I apologize if I wasn't clear first time through.
Yeah, and from my perspective, I think, again, just recognizing where we are, I think it is more prudent, it makes more sense to hold off on all hirings until the January 1st timeframe, just so we have a sense of how things play out at the state level, at the local level, at all levels, you know, between July and the end of December. And then you just give ourselves that time frame to make sure it's the right decision, just so that we're not in a position where we need to, you know, make terminations shortly after bringing on new people.
So, and maybe this is a question for Mark or Brian, but what is the savings if we did this? What is the savings to the taxpayer? Are we talking dollars, cents, or dollars? I mean, my concern is we have, I think, a public safety issue by not having the appropriate amount of police professionals that our police chief says he needs. I think it is a public, you know, health issue if we don't have the right resources, especially at this time, for our to adequately staff our youth and family services team. And you know, if we're talking about a handful of dollars per resident, I want to at least know what that is, and so that we all have that kind of perspective. If you'd rather have, you know, a few extra dollars in everyone's pocket, but you know, you're going to wait on these positions, on these, to me, again, public safety, you know, and personal safety issues, I like to know what those dollars and cents numbers might be.
And for me, it's not a matter of dollars and cents. It's a matter of sustainability and knowing there's so many unknowns going into this budget season and looking to next year. I don't know that I'm comfortable bringing people on board that we may be having a discussion, you know, 6 months, a year from now, that, you know, we may be letting people go. And I hate the thought of potentially furloughing or maybe even letting go some of the employees we have now when they can be useful in other areas. I mean, we have some employees, I'm not going to talk specific departments, but there are employees that we could potentially utilize for some of these minute takers that we've talked about. I mean, the opportunity is there. And I don't see a hazard in waiting. For youth and families specifically, we don't know when they're going to get back in the office. And it's been, not going to say it's been smooth because I'm not going to speak for them on how the remote has been working. But again, it all comes to flexibility and sustainability going forward. And we don't know when they're going back in the office anyway. But I respect exactly what you're saying.
I respectfully disagree with my colleague, Ms. Braccio. We just see it differently, but I respect your opinion.
And Lisa, I also appreciate the flexibility point, but following on Dan's comment, I guess I see youth and family particularly as a public safety issue. And I think, as my understanding, they are very busy now. They are working remotely. And I think that the additional employee starting July 1st can be feathered into that remote operation if they're not back in the office at that time. I think if we ever needed that kind of support for individuals in town, now is the time, with the various family pressures, job pressures, all the things that are associated with the pandemic here. So that's one I'm prepared personally to take the risk that we might have to lay somebody off in order to get that kind of resource available to our residents over the next 6 months here. So that to me is a tough choice, but I think that the value of having that support outweighs the risk of potentially having to hire somebody else. particularly.
And Sam, I thank you for those comments as well. You know, the comments I'm making are not that I don't support youth and family. I just want to make that clear. Just that the ask that I'm, or the request that I'm having of the board do isn't a show of non-support. It's a matter of concern about the budget. And again, I completely respect where you're at, and I understand the need that they have. But we're looking at a 2% cut where, you know, there's cuts going across the building inspector, you know. So again, I completely respect both your opinions very much. Thank you.
And I respect yours. Agree.
All right, Brian, I will move that we adopt Mr. Purple's recommendation that all of the hiring, not just the 2 police positions that we voted on last week, but that all of the hiring be delayed until a January 1, 2021 start.
Second.
So that's moved, seconded. Any other discussion on that motion?
So, Brian,
Yes.
so I want to make sure I actually understand what's happening here. So, the police hire, I understand this would be someone who would come on board, but would have to go to the academy anyway, right? And that's not someone who is going to be a hire day 1, July 1. So is whatever this motion is going to be, is it affecting that police hire start date whatsoever?
So my recollection from our last meeting was that we all had already agreed to defer the police hirings until January 1st. So this motion that Mr. Healy made, and as I recall, doesn't change that and doesn't impact our previous decision on the public safety officers.
And I think
is it only impacting the youth and family hire?
And in the part-time technology.
Technology.
All right, well, I am not going to agree to impact youth and family. So if I understand the motion right.
Okay. Any other comments, discussion?
The only comment is that I think I framed the motion specifically to exclude the police from any effect of this motion. We've already voted on them last week, and the lay of the land as far as they're concerned is already set. So this only goes to any new additional hires that we approved last week.
That's the way I understood the motion as well. Are we all on board with that?
I understand it.
Hearing no
I
disagreement.
understand it. May not be on board with it, but I
Understood. I'm just in agreement with what it is that we're voting on. I'll put it that way. So, all right. With that, action on this motion, Ms. Brashear.
Aye.
Mr. Healy.
Aye.
Mr. Kalenda.
Kalenda, no.
Shea, yes. Mr. Stivers.
Stivers, no.
Stivers, no. So that passes 3-2. Is there any other discussion, anything else that we want to bring up on the budget at this point? Does that put us in a position where
Just that, Mark, I still would like to know what those dollars and cents are in case we bring this up at the next meeting.
Sure. I mean, in rough numbers for the youth and family position, it's about $30,000, which I think Brian
So
Ballantyne.
what's that per household?
About $7 or $8 a household for an average taxpayer.
$7 or $8 a household?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
all right, so Mark, is there anything else you're looking from us? Do you think that
Well, if the board doesn't want to, take a vote on a recommended budget this evening and wants to get the input from advisory, I think that you've at least set the path. And here's where the board is. And that would probably be enough for advisory to work with, on Thursday.
Yeah, that's my inclination.
So, all right, and I'll just offer a different one just for fun. What would be the harm in the Board of Selectmen leading and offering, this is our budget, this is what we voted on. Clearly, we all have flexibility. We just voted on something last week. We changed our mind this week. We could change our mind again next week after we hear from advisory and vote on another budget. What's the problem in leading and presenting the advisory? Here's where the Board of Selectmen, I mean, I guess we could do that unofficially and just say, here's what we think, you know, it's over to you guys. But I always thought that they appreciate some leadership from the Board of Selectmen as to what we think a budget should be. And I think Brian and Mark have put together a great package based on our guidance and our discussion last week and now again today.
Yeah. So personally, Dan, I tend to agree with you on that. And I don't think, you know, again, there's certainly nothing stopping us from having a joint meeting with advisory. You know, if there are differences, I certainly think it makes sense for our board and advisory to go into town meeting with as much agreement as possible. I think that I personally am comfortable with this budget as presented. And just to kick things off, I'll move that our board approves the amended 2% budget as prepared by Mr. Purple and Mr. Ballantyne. No second, apparently, dies on the vine.
Yeah, I am as well, Brian.
Pardon me? I'm sorry, what did you say, Dan? I missed it.
Well, there's a lot of static going on, so I don't know. You said you were comfortable with the budget Brian and Mark put together. Were you making a motion to vote for that or no?
Yes, I moved that we approve that budget.
I would like to second that unless it's already been.
It has not yet. I thought it was dying on the vine. So.
No, seconded.
So it's moved and seconded. Is there any other discussion on that?
Question.
Yes.
So, never mind, that's fine.
So, and again, I just from my personal perspective, I think that we ought to take the lead and support this budget. In no way, shape, or form am I trying to, you know, take away from advisory and the work that they need to do. And if they certainly have a difference of opinion and there are areas that we need to talk about, I'm ready, willing, and able to get together with them at a time next week to hash through those differences so that we can hopefully come to agreement with the two. But I personally feel comfortable moving forward with the budget as presented. So, any other comments? With that
discussion, Brian?
Go ahead, Dan.
Just my last point, and I hope that if anyone from advisory is listening, that they will reach out to Youth and Family and discuss what if they would be fine with a delay in the hire till January, or what harm that may cause residents for the $7 or $8. They may do that analysis, and then we may come back and discuss that piece. But I'm comfortable in voting the budget as presented tonight.
All right. Any other questions or comments? Ms. Braccio.
Aye.
Mr. Healy.
No.
Mr. Kalenda.
Yes.
Mr. Shea is yes. Mr. Stivers.
No.
No. That passes 3-2. So I guess, Mark, if you could let advisory know how we voted tonight. And again, they're meeting Thursday this week, correct?
Yes, they are.
And before we leave this, I see Kathy Cook is here with her hand up. Kathy, can you hear me all right?
Yes, can you
Go
hear
ahead.
me?
Yeah,
Can you hear
go
me?
ahead. Yep, go ahead, Kathy. So I assume you heard the vote we just took?
I did, and I heard the previous discussion on the hiring freeze. So I just wanted to comment on that real quick. I don't have a lot to say tonight. We've got a lot to talk about Thursday. But as far as a hiring freeze, I personally support that because of the word you used, Mr. Shea, flexibility. However, as far as Mr. Kalinda is concerned, based on a conversation that I had this morning with Mr. Valentine and Mr. Purple, we believe that there are people who, because of the virus impact, are going to have the time and the ability to fill in that position until a permanent decision is taken. And as far as the impact on a house in that position, it's not this year's budget that we're worried about, it's the next 5 years. So we've got to keep thinking about the next 5 years. This budget year over year for fiscal year 21 was already under control before the virus. It's still under control. But it's the next 5 years we've got to worry about. And so that's why hiring people is really, really important, because it's going to have a permanent impact on the next 5 years. So I am absolutely supportive of the youth and family service need. I think the fact that working at home makes that need not as great today, because they wanted someone in the office all the time with someone else, and that's not needed right now. But we do think that there is enough hours that are being freed up right now with people that we do not want to furlough or lay off, that could be moved over temporarily until we can decide what the impact of the virus really is in the fall. So I think advisory is going to be happy to hear that you guys voted for the hiring freeze.
Okay.
And then as far as the budget, I've gotten emails, obviously we can't discuss this until the meeting, but I think there's going to be some issues as far as some of the changes that have been proposed, but let's just see what happens on Thursday.
Good. Thanks, Kathy.
And then the third thing, sorry, Brian, the third thing is you guys may want to consider the reserve fund. Right now it's $180,000. Some years we use it, some years we don't, some years it's less, some years it's more. But there definitely is some thought about maybe increasing that for fiscal year 21, just because of the we don't know impact of the virus.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Thank you. One thing before we move past Mr. Ballantyne, I would like to move to consent agenda, item E, approve successor contract for finance director. And I guess, Marty, could I turn it over to you for a quick update on our discussions earlier from the executive session?
Yeah, for purposes of discussion now in the public session, obviously Mr. Ballantyne is aware that his contract is up for review and potential renewal. He and I met, and based on that meeting and the data that he provided to me, and that I communicated my thoughts and we discussed it in executive session, I propose that we adopt the employment agreement in terms of the text that was provided as a draft by Mr. Ballantyne, with the following insertion of numbers. In paragraph 10 of that draft employment agreement, the first year agreement starting on July 1, 2020, that the finance director shall receive a total annual salary of $103,150, which represents an increase of 2.25% of his current salary. That in paragraph 10.2, in the second year of the agreement, the finance director shall receive an increase of 2.5%, which translates to an annual salary of $105,729. In paragraph 3 of paragraph 10, in the third year of the agreement, the finance director shall receive an increase of 2.75% for an annual salary of $108,636. That in subparagraph 5 of paragraph 10, that the town will make a 457 plan deferred compensation payment to the finance director for 3 years annually, representing 3% of his base pay in each of those 3 years. And then finally, I apologize, Ms. Hale brought this up when we talked about it earlier, but there is one additional item. It was paragraph 11, where the town agrees to buy back any unused vacation time up to a maximum of 5 days or 40 hours at the end of the finance director's vacation year. So other than bringing the draft agreement in line according to dates, those are based on discussions I had with Mr. Ballantyne, my review, and the board's review of the employment agreement. And that is the employment agreement that I would move that the board approve on behalf of Mr. Ballantyne.
And I'll second that for discussion. And Brian, I just want to let you know that the entire board was unanimously in support of that, as we discussed it previously, and unanimously spoke very highly of you and recognized the hard work that you do year in and year out, day in and day out for the town, and appreciate everything that you do very, very much.
Well, you made it easy for me tonight, so thank you all, and thank you especially Selectman Healy for spending the time.
Any other comments, discussions?
Well done, Brian. Again, you continue to be a great asset for the town, and we're thrilled to have you and thrilled to be able to, extend the agreement.
Well said.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
So,
Thank you all.
to vote, Ms. Braccio,
Aye.
Mr. Healy,
Aye, well-deserved employment agreement.
Mr. Kalenda,
A hearty yes.
Mr. Shea is also a hearty yes. Mr. Stivers,
Marty, yes.
hearty yes. That's 5 hearty yeses, I'll say. Thank you very much, Brian. Appreciate you taking the time tonight.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Yep, thanks. Next item on continuing unscheduled appointments, continued discussion about open space and recreation plan. I know that Melissa Danza is in attendance as well. I know that we had discussed this at our last meeting. So I don't know who wants to kick this off, if anybody.
I'm happy to, Brian.
Go ahead, Dan.
So I think it's a really good work product. It clearly took tons of effort to put together and tons of time and research to put together. And I just basically have 2 overall comments on it. So clearly it's written with open space in mind, as it should be. It's their document. From my perspective as a selectman for the town, we have responsibility for not only open space, but also responsible development in town. And the efforts that the EDC and others make. So my one point is there's lots of commentary in the document that I think doesn't really even need to be there and doesn't add to it. It almost looks like it could be read as anti building of apartments, anti-development, open space, commentary that open space actually can be looked at as a stronger avenue for, tax valuations and benefits to the town than say, a home or a building or apartment complex. I don't know that adds to what open space even needs to do with this document. For me, it actually detracted if the reader is reading it, and I'm saying to myself, are they actually saying that there's these big fights over development? Yes, there's been some people out of 11,000 that haven't been happy, don't want to see Park Central happen. I get it. I saw much of that discussion. I don't think that benefits this document. I think it can turn readers off. And I think there's a lot of that can be stripped out of the document so it doesn't look to be an anti-development, an anti-EDC. And a lot of these developers, as we know, are our own town residents as well. So I started to redline that. I sent my comments to Mark. The document is too big to attach and send back to Mark or anyone else. And so that was number one, was the look and feel. And again, I think as representatives of this board, we represent the entirety of the town. And I didn't want to see that conflict in this document if we're being asked to support it. So that was number one. And then number two was there was some commentary in there about the explosion of population growth in Southborough. And while that may have been true for a period of time, my understanding is through the data that I've seen on the regional school committee is that the projections are actually a downward trend in the number of students, to the point where we actually may need to look at closing one of our schools and consolidating at some point in maybe the not too distant future. So I don't think that data in there was actually accurate. It may have been at some point in time, but I think it is less accurate now. In fact, the trends are even on a downward trajectory that we have seen that may be coming to our schools. So those are the 2 points. I don't know how to reconcile those in tonight, and I don't think it can be, but I would love to see that document in a much more neutral fashion that still clearly advocates the great need and want for open space in our town, but recognizes and respects the other residents and other aspects of our town as well.
Brian, I was the one who, or at least one of the people who raised concerns about timing and what I perceived as an all or nothing required vote. I still would like to hear about the timing issue, but I mean, it's a long document. There's tons of material in there. It's an important document. I mean, in some respects, I suffer because I've only been on the Board of Selectmen for a year, so I don't have background with it. But as a result, I kind of dove into the process for how this document came to be. And I sort of worked my way back. And again, we got it in May of 2020. I look back, the Planning Board got it in January. The Conservation Commission got it in August of 2019. And the Conservation Commission spent, I think, 4 or 5 different meetings talking about the document, weighing what the responsible party items were in the document for the Conservation Commission, et cetera, et cetera. I want that same opportunity. And I want that same opportunity to discuss what's a 200-page document, and it's a very important document. The other thing I want to explore, I mean, I went back, it's a 2019 document, 2019 plan, making its way to the Selectmen in 2020. Most of the activity relating to the report is from 2016. The last entry I could see from the Recreation Commission in the entire document was from 2016. I looked through all of the Recreation Commission meetings in 2019. That it's a 2019 plan. As far as I can tell, unless there's something buried in those minutes that I didn't see, they've never voted on this document. At least they didn't vote on it in 2019, and it's identified as a 2019 document. And then the final thing is, I'm going to want to explore the nature of this, of how the document came to be, because I looked through these open space recreation plans from a number of other communities. And the way they were developed is that the planning board or the conservation board or planning, conservation, and boards of selectmen appointed committees to put together the, I'll call it the OSRP reports. Again, I wasn't on the Board of Selectmen, so I don't know, but I went back to 2016 to figure out where the committee, who was responsible. Maybe the Board of Selectmen were. I couldn't identify that. I don't know who appointed the committee that was responsible for this. And I couldn't find any minutes of their meetings for, what the input was, how it was developed, et cetera, et cetera. So just in doing what I consider my due diligence, I wasn't able to answer questions that I think are pretty basic to my review of an incredibly important document for the town. It's got a 7-year shelf life starting, I think, 6 months ago or so when there was a review by the state. So I need all those questions answered before I feel comfortable taking a vote to approve a a document that's been in existence at least since August of 2019, but that we didn't get until May of 2020.
No, understood. And I know Melissa is with us as well. So Melissa, I don't know if you just want to chime in here and, as much as you can, touch on the points that have been brought up so far. I think that would be appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. So to Dan's point, I think the whole point of this document, was kind of the goals, and the meat was taken from the survey from the residents. And, all boards, members, citizens were open to comment and be a part of this project. So the main meat of the plan was driven by the comments of the residents. So it wasn't necessarily skewed to be one way or another. I mean, obviously, it is an open space and recreation plan. And I think at the last meeting, Brian, you made a point that it's not every single parcel, as they come up. These are the parcels that we want to look at, and we want to develop that plan that when, these things come up to be sold or something changes, that we analyze them for what they are and what they could be and determine what the best path forward is. And then in terms of the timing of the plan, so this was, up until probably about 6 months ago, was called the 2016 Open Space and Recreation Plan, because it has been in work since then. A lot of the public outreach and information and surveys were done at that time. It wasn't until talking with Melissa Cryan from EEA, when she conditionally approved it, was it suggested to update it to 2019 to reflect the accepted date, because it was confusing that it was 2016, but really starts in 2019. So that's why, it hasn't really been anything recent. In terms of the Conservation Commission looking at it, on our agendas, we were just discussing what our responsible roles would be and how we were going to, I guess, reach those goals, or what our actions were going to be proactively. So not necessarily analyzing the plan that was done in one night. They had reviewed it themselves. They had been part of the process. My predecessor, Beth Rosenblum, was part of the people who were involved. The main, I guess, parties, there was not a committee, but the Open Space Preservation Commission was kind of the main driver of this, along with some of the managers, including Beth, who was the conservation agent, and Doreen Ferguson, who was the recreation director at the time. So the majority of the work was done while Doreen was here. We did update Tim Davis when he started, and kind of, gave him what it was, if he had any comments, questions. He gave us the recreation facility study, and we kind of went back and forth on that aspect. But when I guess the majority of this, except those, items that were outlined by Melissa Cryan at EEA as needed fixing, which were kind of some map and legends, or kind of specifying certain things that they thought were not included, but in fact, it just maybe South Road doesn't have them, like vulnerable populations. So just needing to call out those factors. I tried as much as I could to update to kind of the 2019 things that we had done already, like purchase of specific properties. Some of the population data might be still from the 2016, so that, might be outdated, but that was kind of when everything was done. So to that point, we wanted to come to the Board of Selectmen last, and that's kind of why you've had it kind of after the other boards. To say we've completed our package, we've done the due diligence. A lot of boards, committees, members of the public have worked on this, and just for the last year, it's been just updating and getting letters and making sure that we're addressing all the comments that the state has made.
Brian, if I may.
Yep, go ahead, Lisa.
Just to give a little bit of additional background as well, that expand on that. Melissa had mentioned that the report was generated by surveys and public outreach that was done in 2016. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, there was a forum as well as surveys done. There were two consultants that worked and created this document, the majority of this document, and the Recreation Commission funded the majority of this, with CPA picking up the balance. Doreen and Beth Rosenblum, two prior employees, were very active in this, and they took the lead and worked with the consultants on this. So it was a combined effort. I just want to make clear that this wasn't a document that Open Space sat down and just created themselves. There were consultants involved, recreation and conservation through Beth Rosenblum before Melissa came on board, were actively involved in crafting this. Certainly there were parts of it that the Open Space Preservation Commission had worked on and supplied as well. Part of the goals as well. And a lot of the goals came from the public outreach.
Brian?
Lisa, can I follow up on that?
Sure.
Because,
Go ahead,
and
Marty.
Melissa
Then
will,
I'll go to you, Tim.
yeah, well, you're on the line. In the report itself, and again, I compared a bunch of other communities, and they clearly put together this document differently than Southborough did. And so I'm trying to understand what Southborough did to come up with this document. And so, as I said, I looked back over a bunch of, and God knows we're being peppered with open meeting complaints these days. And so my antennae are up for whether or not we are producing things in accordance with the open meeting requirements. And I can't find a single open meeting about this. There are a couple of forums, I acknowledge that, but I don't understand what group is responsible for this document. And I can't find anything that indicated that Selectmen appointed a group. I can't find anything indicating that Conservation appointed a group or that Planning did. So again, where did this document come from? It reads like a bunch of people got together, well-meaning, who had an interest in open space and recreation, and put together a document. And my view is that that's not the way we should be functioning. So as well-meaning as someone might be, if I'm wrong about that's what happened, then again, disabuse me of the notion, but that's the way it looks.
Okay, go ahead, Sam.
Marty, I think that it does have a long and difficult past, in the sense that in a perfect world, you've got a very focused effort with appropriate resources to make this kind of work happen relatively quickly. I think this is suffering partly from the fact that it didn't have, a strong support resource base to make it happen more quickly. So you wind up with some process issues like we're talking about here. I think to Dan's earlier point, this, like any other report or most other reports, does have a point of view, and it's open space and recreation. So in fact, the agenda for the report is not to come up with an overall plan for Southborough, including balance between development, open space, housing, you name it. You look at the housing plan, it doesn't, again, focus on issues outside of housing too widely. EDC does things that focus on development, not other areas as well. And I think it's up to us, to Selectmen, to take that set of plans and proposals for the town across a wide variety of dimensions and put them together and set priorities. So I guess I don't expect this to have a strong focus on areas outside of open space and recreation, and I think it does that job. I guess my interest is in sort of where we go from here, how we get to the finish line, because as folks point out, there's been a lot of effort over a long period of time, taken a lot of public input. I myself participated in a number of these sessions along the way, provided input. And I think it's unfortunate that we are now late in the game, apparently, and aren't positioned to get this tied up and finalized. I think, Marty, your suggestions are useful, but if we had to start over again, I think that creates another set of pressures in terms of where do we find the funding and the committee to do it. And again, as we're looking at the master plan committee now, there's a lot of effort going on there, and I'm not sure how much additional resources available to step back and say, okay, let's take another whack at this and try to do something different, more up to date, revised process, et cetera. So I'm struggling with how we get this to the finish line without a huge amount of additional resource required to do that and distract from other things that are important here.
Yeah. Hey, Brian, Freddie's in the waiting room. Maybe she could answer some of Marty's questions.
Yeah, I don't mind going to Freddie, but I guess just from my perspective here, and to touch on what you said, Sam, and I don't want to speak on behalf of Marty, but I don't think I heard Marty saying, let's scrap this and start all over. I think and what I'm hearing is just still a number of continued questions about the process and just wanting to make sure that everything was handled appropriately along the way. So, personally, I see this as, we are having the continued discussion tonight, but I'm not ready to have this go to a vote yet. I just think that there's still too many questions, and I think legitimate questions that people do need to have answered. But
yeah, Brian, can I just
Go
jump in
ahead.
terms of so there's not any misunderstanding about my view. I'm not looking to I mean, a ton of work was put in on this.
Yeah.
It came to us 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And with the representation that there were grants in the balance, if we that we needed to act pretty quickly. It's a pretty big document to act quickly, and so again, I dove back in to try to understand from whence it came, why it came, et cetera, and it is. I would be much more comfortable making sure that what appeared to me to be issues about the way it was developed are addressed before we vote on it, rather than voting on it without there being clarity about that. Otherwise, again, we're sitting in an environment where there are, unfortunately, folks out in the town of Southborough who are sitting there looking to file open meetings complaints if an I isn't dotted and a T isn't crossed. They have that right. They have the right to do that. But I'm very reluctant approving a document without making sure that we haven't put a big target for another issue. That's all.
Okay.
And Brian, if I may.
Yep. Go ahead, Dan.
So additionally, and I hear what Sam's saying. I said it myself. I mean, this is written, by open space, for open space, but for whatever reason, the board is being asked to adopt it. I have a responsibility and you can wait me out for the next few weeks if you want, but I have a responsibility for the entirety of our town, not just one board, one commission. So if Sam, you can put your name to whatever you want, but what I'm saying is I'm not going to put my name to something that I know is already antagonistic towards another part of the community that I represent. That's all I'm saying. Let it be an open space document as it should be. Again, I said it at the start, tremendous work went into it. And it's not only appreciated by this person who appreciates our open space commission and the work that they do in the open space in town, but there's another side of our community that if you're asking, if I'm being asked to put my name to this thing and it is too much in it, in the document contains what looks like anti-development rhetoric, why am I being asked to, as a board of selectmen who has responsibility to represent the entirety of the town, don't ask me to sign it then. Have it be your own document and do whatever you need to do with it, other than the fact you're appointed by the board of selectmen and should be advocating for things that you're elected, or excuse me, that the appointed board is behind. But then do what you want and don't ask us to. And then the other thing is I still didn't have the answer to the other question of the data in there seemed to be, and maybe to Marty's point, it's old data. And this notion of the continued explosion of population in Southborough, when the data I've seen is actually going the opposite way, especially for our younger residents. I just want it to be a well-grounded, accurate document if the board is going to be asked to sign it, and that is representative of our community, or at a minimum doesn't pit one part of our community against the other. I started deleting all of what looked like anti-development rhetoric in the document that didn't need to be there. The document's huge, and most of it I didn't touch because I agree, it looked great. Just get rid of the stuff that goes against another portion of our community, a large portion of our community that we need actually for responsible development and a tax base to alleviate the tax burden on the residential taxpayers. Don't go against them in this document and then ask me to sign it, because I represent those people too.
Right.
My point, and just make sure
We all
it's
do.
accurate with the data that's in there.
Yeah, we all represent all sides, all parts of the town, Dan. I don't see it as anti-development particularly.
You got to read the document then, Sam.
I've read it. So I think
I'll read it. Maybe you and I will have our own.
All right. So So I think first and foremost, I think it probably makes sense to, at a future meeting, and schedule an early appointment with those that have the most knowledge about the history of this document and the preparation of it, and get as many answers as we can to the process that was followed, just so we can start to establish a roadmap forward for how we're going to get past this. We're not going to solve it tonight. Again, I don't feel comfortable bringing it to a vote tonight. And spent a decent amount of time talking about it, and I don't know if there's other comments, but
The only thing, Brian, and I would just ask this, a timeline for how this happened. Who appointed who, when meetings were held. If there are not minutes of those meetings, that's fine. I'd like to know that. But if there are, I'd like to see them. When votes were taken by various boards, again, I hear Melissa, I get you that you'd want the Board of Selectmen to be the final word on this, as the overall representatives of the town, but I'd like to see what the steps were that got it to the Board of Selectmen.
Am I going to be able to speak?
Yeah, go ahead, Freddie.
Hi, this is Freddie Gillespie. I'm chair of the Open Space Preservation Commission. I wanted to, and I know you're not voting, I just wanted to make a couple of things clear. This is not an Open Space Preservation Commission document. When it started, there were over a dozen people sitting around the conference room. There was the chair of recreation, as well as the Doreen, director of recreation, selectmen. I think it was Bonnie Faniff at the time. We had ADA, conservation, open space, and I suggested that to do a proper development of this plan, you needed to hire a consultant, because what happened the last time is that it ended up in limbo, because we had a half-finished plan that ended up on Vera Coleus's computer where no one knew where it was when she left. And at that time, I worked with conservation, and we pulled it together and got one accepted by the state. I said, we don't want to do that again. However, no funds or support was forthcoming, and recreation took the lead and hired the consultant. The reason you're not seeing this in minutes is because it was pretty much run by staff. You had Doreen Ferguson and Beth Rosenblum from conservation, who worked, they hired the Conway School of Landscape Design, and they met with the students and they did the work. The Open Space Commission, anytime we reviewed it in a commission meeting, it would have been on our agenda. The students and the staff put together the public outreach meetings. We weighed in on what we wanted from the Open Space Commission, whether the director of recreation worked with her commission or not. That's not my job as an open space commissioner. And all along, I consistently said, this is not the plan that I would have worked on. So if you're finding fault with it, don't be saying it's an open space commission plan. It was not. We didn't want it done this way from the beginning. So we did not write this, and we did not have the end edits on what you're seeing in front of you totally. What did happen is, again, the Conway School of Landscape Design had a contract to not complete a whole open space and rec plan. They did a presentation to their school as part of their school project that I believe both Doreen and Beth drove out to the western part of the state and saw. And then we had an unfinished product. I kept prodding, how are we going to finish this? How are we going to get it done? And when finally nothing was moving, there were other things going on in their departments. I worked with the CPC to get some funding. And the final two things that were done was a list of the town-owned properties, as well as the ADA requirements. We hired a consultant to do that. And that was done with Doreen and Beth. Then when they both retired, again, it was in limbo. And we were able, right before they retired, I believe, I found out that they would only accept the plan. So we had $12,000 in consultants, I think, $10,000 to $12,000, not hired by the Open Space Commission and not overseen by our commission.
Okay.
And if we didn't get it in the 2019, it would be all out the door. So it got conditional approval with a few other things to be done. And my point is now, if you want to start over, you can. But there's no going back and undoing the problems of where you are now. So you have a document that is conditionally approved that you can support or not support. But if you don't support it, it can start over. But I don't think you get to go back because it's based on the public outreach that was done in 2016. So
Okay.
you take off the table, let me just finish. You take off the table the ability of this document to give recreation and grant money. There's no grant money that the Open Space Commission is looking for. So, it's really in your hands to do what you think's best. The Open Space Commission does not have a vested interest in you supporting this at this time.
Okay, thank you, Freddie. So again, I think just to move this along, I think that I'm going to ask Mr. Purple to reach out to Melissa and try and work out the timeline that you were referring to, Marty.
Yep.
Let's just get that timeline of answers. Let's indicate, which boards had involvement. When did they vote? When did they act on it? What were the votes on it? And let's just get as much of those logistics taken care of and in place, documented, so at least those questions are answered and we can.
Yeah, Brian, I think it's important because what Freddie just said is inconsistent with what's in the report, which says that the town put together a working group.
All right.
And I want clarity as to how this thing came about.
All right, very good. All right, so before we move off this, I'm going to assume Mr. Butka wanted to talk to this. He's had his hand up for quite a while. Paul, you there? Paul, you're on mute if you are. Paul going once, going twice.
Hold on,
Brian. Sorry.
Actually, Sue and I are both here, and I think Sue wanted to say something. Just I was going to save it for public comment. I didn't realize that, as she was in the chat, that it would actually, you guys would know that we were on and trying to say something. But
all right, so you're waiting for the public comment portion of the meeting?
Yeah, I think that's what we'd like to do. Yeah.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Paul. All right. All right. So I'm going to move on to reports. So Mark, you'll take the lead in working with Melissa on that, please.
Yeah, no, I'll take care of that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Going to reports, chair's report. Two things that I wanted to bring up. First is a reminder to everybody in town about the town election that's coming up. The date is June 16th from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. at the Trotter School. And also encourage people to vote early. I did touch base with the town clerk's office earlier today, and to date, between early voting and absentee ballots, there are about 250 that have requested ballots to date. So that's where we stand with that. But again, just want to encourage everybody to vote. I encourage everybody not only to vote in the contested races, but to recognize the efforts that others in town, even though their positions may be uncontested, the seats may be uncontested. I think it's quite an effort to stand up, pull papers, get signatures, and run for a position. And I think everybody who has done that, deserves recognition and consideration by everybody in town, and I encourage everybody to vote. Secondly, I just wanted to touch base with the board, and I'm 100% guilty myself. I admit it. We had distributed documents earlier in the winter for performance review forms for the town administrator, and admittedly, with things that were going on in my life in February, and also with the onset of this pandemic, the completion of those performance review forms fell down on priority list in my mind. I'm not sure where everybody else is with this, but I just wanted to get a sense from everybody on what a schedule we should implement moving forward on this.
Yeah, I'm in favor of moving forward with it as quickly as we can, given timing for renewal of Mr. Purple's contract. I think it's useful to get whatever feedback we have into that process quickly.
So, and I think I think everybody who's on the board now has a lot of valuable input to provide. So do we want to adopt a schedule for that?
Please.
Yes.
All right, what do we want to say that we have comments complete and submitted as has been noted through the emails?
By our next meeting?
Couple of weeks.
Yep. All right, so we'll have it submitted in advance of our meeting on June 2nd, or set June 2nd as the deadline.
Good.
Yes.
Sure. And is there, and maybe I'm just not remembering, is there a process set out for exactly how we do this, who they go to? I suspect they probably don't go directly to Mr. Purple.
That's correct. That's correct. No, there's an email from Vanessa. So there's a form that is distributed, and there's directions on who to forward that form to. It's compiled independently, and all the comments anonymously distributed to each of us.
I can send that out again if the board would like.
Yeah, why don't you send that? That would be helpful, just so we all have the latest and greatest, most recent forms.
Yeah, this board member would appreciate
it. I'm not alone?
No.
No.
Would you like my pre-filled form?
Yeah. All right, members' reports.
I have something, Brian.
Go ahead, Lisa.
So I would just like to praise the police and fire department. This past Sunday, there was a call for a missing 86-year-old woman here in town. And a lot of different agencies came together. CERT was one, which I'm a member of. And I just wanted to share the professionalism and pride that I felt in seeing how well our police and fire came together. This was a major event. There was, and I'm going to read this just to make sure I don't forget anybody. So you had police and fire duty crews, the fire recalled staff, the Southborough CERT was activated, Fire District 14 Technical Rescue Team, the Department of Fire Services Special Ops Drone Unit, Grafton, Westboro, and Mass Environmental Police Canine Units all came together. It was really something amazing to see how it was staged, how it was coordinated from the Captain Sadowski that was in charge, just to how it was all done and arranged. Thankfully, once everybody came together and we started looking, she was found in a matter of 15 minutes. I mean, obviously it took time to get everybody together, but I wanted to give a huge thank you to all of those groups that came together, and especially Southborough for putting the effort out there. It was an amazing collaborative event. Unlike anything I've ever seen. I have to be honest with you. I was absolutely taken aback at how amazing it was. So that was it. I just wanted to share with the board that they all deserve our thanks for sure.
Great. Thank you for that, Lisa.
Agreed.
Other members?
I do very briefly, Brian, another amazing salute to Vanessa, our assistant town administrator, Sarah Cassell, the director of Youth and Family Services, and Pam LaFrancois, director of the Senior Center. I know there were others involved, but they were the three. Everybody in Southborough in the next day or two is going to be getting a mailing that was put together with updated information about resources that are available to youth, seniors, anyone in town who is adversely affected emotionally, medically, financially by the COVID-19 crisis. And it's particularly geared towards reaching the folks in town who are the most difficult to reach. Tremendous effort by them, help funded by our community fund, and just couldn't give louder and stronger kudos to their effort.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then the second thing is, folks may have noted that the Main Street project is back. I've heard from some residents in town that they would appreciate better updates from the Mass DOT. It's a state project. Karen Galligan and I, the head of DPW, we've spoken. We're trying to push DOT. Unfortunately, it is a state project, so our ability is somewhat limited, but Karen's probably not quite as good at me as annoying people, but I intend to annoy people and try to get as good of updates as we can for folks in the town, so they know what areas of Main Street are affected at a particular time, and hopefully ease the burden as best we can.
Great.
Thank you for spearheading that, Marty.
Any other reports?
Nope.
Hearing done. Mr. Purple.
Mr. Chairman, my update is more COVID related. So if you'd like to do it now, or you want to wait to put something under the COVID item, that's up to you.
It's up to you. Go ahead.
All right, so I'll go now, and Ms. Hale can fill in the gaps that I leave behind. One of the things that, well, first of all, as you see on the website, you know, the COVID-19 page, we've continued to update our statistics as we've moved along. We currently have 38 cases of positive cases in town. 31 of those have been released from isolation, and our public health nurse is only currently following. 34 have been released, and only 4 cases are currently still in isolation. So I think, you know, by comparison, unless you're living way out in the western part in the Williamstown part of the state, we're doing very well, and I think that's a credit to as much to our Board of Health, our public health nurse, and a lot of the contact tracing that they've been doing. So I just wanted to give you that. The second piece is, given the governor's reopening announcement and the phasing that he's looking at, in conjunction with the fire chief as the emergency management director, the public health nurse, and Mrs. Hale, we're trying to figure out, we've got everybody remotely. How do we bring people back? What's the right way to do it? Are there people we still should keep remote? And what improvements or what things do we need to do to the buildings in order to make sure that employees feel safe coming back, and then begin the transition to allow residents and customers to come back into the buildings. And so I'm working with the chief and Emily and Vanessa to try and put together a plan, which we're then going to work with all the departments to put together a plan as to how this is going to work. But as much as I was hoping that we could see about getting employees back into the building for the day after Memorial Day, May 26th, it looks like it's going to be June 1st and maybe June 8th, depending. I'm working with John Parent, you know, on some things for the buildings as well. But, you know, we need to make sure that we do things the right way, and that we allow the, you know, we make allowances for the employees to make sure that they feel comfortable and they feel safe, you know, in coming back into the buildings. Vanessa, I don't know if you've got anything you wanted to add to that.
No, I think you've covered that. Some of it is, you know, sort of things that physical things we need to do within the workspaces. And that's why we're working with the facilities department to get that in place, and figuring out, you know, for how long, once employees are back in the building, do we need to stagger work schedules? Because as you all know, some of our workstations, cubicles, you know, are really back to back. And, you know, figuring out, well, where can someone go and have lunch? You know, we don't want people congregating the way they used to. So it's a lot of logistics, but I agree, we hope to be there by June 1st.
And one final piece, Vanessa has been leading an interview team for the first round of our town accountant position. As you know, Ms. Krieger is scheduled to retire at the end of June. And so we are looking for her replacement. I believe that there's 2 finalists that'll be coming to me for interviews over the course of the next week or so. I have requested in-person meetings. I don't mind Zoom. I'm just not going to hire with it. So, so we'll have the two finalists will be meeting with me and a couple of other members of our team in the next week or so, and hopefully beginning of June or you know, maybe have to have a special meeting if not for June 2nd. We can have a recommendation to you, a candidate for appointment for the accountant position.
Okay.
That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Consent agenda. We have items A through I listed in our agenda. I'm going to recommend that we hold and take individual action on items B, C, and D. I don't know if there are others that people wanted to address separately.
You already voted item E, just
Correct. Correct. All right. So with that, I will move consent agenda items A, F, G, H, and I.
Second.
Any other discussion? Ms. Braccio,
Aye.
Mr. Healy,
Aye.
Mr. Kalenda,
Aye.
Mr. Shea, aye. Mr. Stivers.
Aye.
All right. Item B, reappointments of staff positions for fiscal year 2021. This is an item that we had that was included in our packet last week, and there were a couple of updates to it that I just wanted to make sure were clear. I had overlooked at our last meeting that we had committed on an annual basis to review the special municipal employee status, and that impacted one of the individuals that's on the list. The tree warden continues to be identified as a special municipal employee. I just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that. And also, Jay Tellerman was added as under the special legal counsel. He has provided services on a number of occasions, so I just wanted to make sure that his name was included on that listing as well. With that, I will move that we approve the appointments, the staff appointments under item B on the consent agenda.
Second.
So it's moved and seconded. Any discussion?
Yes, please.
Go ahead, Sam.
We talked at our last meeting about taking a look at legal services. And we've got several, obviously, legal contractors there, town council, special counsel, and so forth. And I continue to be interested in figuring out how we can take a look at the market on this. So clearly, you know, we need to move forward on some appointments here. We talked when we did this last year. I proposed that we put a 90-day appointment or something like that for the legal team here to allow us to go out, take a look at the market, get feedback on how others might propose to provide these services in maybe different ways. And I continue to support that. So I would, again, I support the appointments other than those 3 or 4 that are in the legal area at this point.
Yeah. So, well, I guess I'll just offer, you know, I went back and actually looked at the minutes from the meeting that we had a year ago where we discussed it. And, you know, again, it was suggested a 90-day appointment, and that was not voted. But it was discussed, and there were, you know, at least 3 members that saw, you know, that it could be worthwhile to look at procuring legal services differently. I guess from my perspective, and if it's my fault as chair for not adding it as an agenda item between last year and now, shame on me, and I apologize to everybody. But in my defense, I'm just one of 5, and any number of us could have raised this issue over the past year. I guess the reality is, you know, we have these appointments set in place to take effect July 1st. And, you know, we're approaching late May now, so time is not in our favor on this. You know, if the RFP process does take a while, I think that there are advantages and also disadvantages to regularly putting RFPs out for these types of services. As somebody who works in an industry that responds to RFPs that municipalities put out, municipalities can get a reputation for, putting out RFPs, but not making any changes. And there's, less of an appetite for different firms to respond to those RFPs if there's a perception that a change isn't going to be made. Firms don't need to practice in writing proposals. And conversely, I think if there's an issue that we'd like to have and bring up specifically with any of the legal counsels, I think the proper thing to do would be to have a discussion with them about areas where improvement could be made, or if we are looking to make changes, why those changes would be made. So I mean, at the end of this, I understand what you're saying, but I personally support reappointment of the legal counsel positions for the next year. And again, if this is something that we want to look at to approach differently at a later time, then I think that we need to have, a separate discussion to, agree upon what process we want to follow for procuring those services. So I'm supportive of reappointing for the next year all of the positions that are on the list. And if there are others with thoughts on that.
I would ask Marty and Lisa, who were
Brian, if I may.
Hang on, Sam's got the floor. Go ahead, Sam.
I would ask Marty and Lisa, who were the two who were supportive of this previously. I mean, is there an option to do 6-month appointment kind of thing for this to give us time to look at
Brian,
this?
if I may.
I think.
Hang on, Dan. Sam has got the floor.
Oh.
Yeah, I think the issue in my mind is simply that we have a responsibility to make sure we're getting the right services at the right prices and the right structures in anything that we buy, including from legal services to goods and so forth, all the way through. We do this for consulting services in a variety of areas. And it seems to me that this is something I understand it's not been looked at in the last 15 years, as I've been told. So let's look around and see what's out there.
I'm always a little bit wary when somebody says what my position was. So I'll state what my position is.
Was, I said, not is.
Even was. I like to state my own position. And my position is that we need to look at how we contract services. I'm not big on identifying particular individuals. If we're going to do this, then there are no sacred cows. And I think that we need to identify what contractual services the town has and whether or not they are putting them out to bid, and adopt an approach for the town that we bid our services, rather than saying we need to look at this item or that item and subject ourselves to being accused of favoritism. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it. I'm in favor of doing it, but it's a much more global approach than these appointments are up. Let's look at them. It really is. We're going to dig down. We're going to dig down.
I agree. I'm very much in favor of that as well.
So, I was in favor of taking a look at, and I believe it was more than just one specific service. I agree, Marty, that if we're going to do this, we're going to do this as a whole. But here we are again, a year's gone by. We're at the 11th hour. I can tell you I'm not in favor of doing it at this point, because again, I think there's a lot of legwork that needs to go into it. I don't think we have the time to do it. And I think that's a disservice to the taxpayers. I believe it's something that certainly could be explored. Obviously, there's nothing to lose by exploring it. I just don't think, as we're sitting here willing to or looking at taking a vote on appointments, that we're having this discussion now. It's at the 11th hour, in my opinion. So I think it's a worthy discussion. I just don't know that it's a discussion that we should be having now versus 9 months ago.
Mr. Klenda, you had a point?
Thank you, Mr. Shea. So I'll agree with, hopefully folks can hear me. I could barely hear the audio from Marty and from Lisa, but I believe what I'm hearing is consistent with my belief as well, that the time would have been months and months ago for Sam or anyone to do the analysis they wanted to do. I happen to start to question whether or not there's something more personal here that is driving this effort. If there was a judgment against, you know, Sam, a ruling you didn't like a while ago, and now's your shot to go after a town council who has just been nothing but, in my experience, exemplary on behalf of the town for years. And you know, if Marty and Lisa, if I heard you right, if you're looking to do a holistic view of every set of goods and services that the town procures, have at it. I think that's a great idea. It's a dangerous exercise, as I also heard that you could start putting RFPs out every single year, and then nothing happens, or you go to the lowest bidder, and because, hey, look at this low bidder, we're going to go with them, and you also get what you pay for. So I actually think it's an opportunity for us to recognize the great legal services that we've been provided by council and others, and I wholly support signing them up for at least another year.
Dan, I've said every time we've talked about this that I'm not trying to go after anybody. I'm trying to get the right set of package of services for the town, the right people in the right positions. And so I think that I'm certainly supportive of looking at all the things we buy. This is one of a number of them. And I don't think this is any different relative to what we ought to be looking for in terms of getting value for the dollar we're paying.
Okay.
So I'll move to approve the appointments.
Second.
Okay, moved, seconded. Just one clarification point, if I might. And Mark, please confirm this. Rebecca Lacey, special legal counsel that we had appointed to assist with the Conservation Commission.
Yes.
She is also a special municipal employee, and I'm not
That is
sure
correct.
that got cut off on the table or not, but that was an appointment that we had made.
Yes.
So that line should read special municipal employee as well.
That's correct.
So my motion stands as amended.
Very good.
And one other amendment, if a board member was so willing to make it, I just noticed there's both Lisa Mead and Jay Tallerman as special counsel on here. Same law firm. We tend to use Jay more than Lisa. So you really only need one, only need to appoint one of them because it's essentially the law firm. So I would suggest that you probably delete Lisa and leave Jay.
I would agree.
Okay.
As re-amended?
As re-amended.
As re-amended. All right, Ms. Braccio,
Aye.
Mr. Healy,
Aye.
Mr. Kalenda,
Aye.
Mr. Shea is aye, Mr. Stivers.
No.
Passes 4-1. Item C on consent agenda, assignment of 5/13/2020 open meeting law complaint from Ginny Kramer to town council for response. There was a question about which council would be appropriate to provide the response for this, and the determination is the town council is the one that this will be assigned to. So I just wanted to clarify that. Is there any, so I will move that we assign 5/13 open meeting law complaint to town council for response.
Second.
Move seconded. Any discussion?
Brian, for discussion.
Go ahead, Dan.
I had asked Mr. Purple, I believe it was a while back, and I'd like to reiterate it. And again, I think someone brought it up earlier that obviously open meeting law complaints are free to the taxpayer. It's an avenue for them to seek, a righting of a wrong they believe may have occurred. And so we, as Marty has stated, for whatever reason, the town of Southborough seems to be getting a lot of these from the same person or persons over and over and over again. And they seem to all lose or virtually every single time lose when the analysis is done, but we still have to go through it. I just think it's important for the residents of the town of Southborough to understand the cost that they are making every single time one of these comes in and has to go to council to review. They have to do all the research, provide a legal opinion. Then it may or may not go to the Attorney General's office, another opinion. It costs the town of Southborough lots of money to do these. And again, we understand that's an obligation and we'll continue it. But at some point, when the same people keep doing it over and over and over again and happen to lose generally over and over and over again, it might be nice for the taxpayers to understand how much this is costing them every time it's done. I asked Mark if that kind of analysis is available for the residents.
Yes, that's something that we can get. Unfortunately, being remote, it's not something I have access to, but I can put that together. Are you looking simply for the same person who is filing these? Are you looking at all open meeting law complaints in general?
I mean, well, clearly there's been a pattern very recently from the same individual, and it's costing this town in a time when we actually don't have a lot of excess funds. Now again, have at it if they want, it's their right, but maybe they should also understand the tremendous cost. And if they happen to win these all the time, then that'd be a different story. When you lose them all the time and you're costing the town thousands and thousands of dollars in legal fees, what that gets borne by the residents, maybe that'll have some impact on the next one they want to file, frivolous or not.
Hey, Dan, I'd point out that there are at least 2 or 3 of those that were actually upheld by the Attorney General's office. So we're not, they didn't.
Yeah,
want-
Phil,
All right, so the motion was made, seconded.
Sam, we'll have that discussion after I read to you from the other document.
Motion was made, seconded. Ms. Braccio,
Aye.
Mr. Healy,
Aye.
Mr. Kalenda,
Aye.
Mr. Shea, aye, Mr. Stivers.
Aye.
Very good. And D, I had held, I just wanted to let everyone know, so we have not been able to meet at the meeting room for quite a while now. And more often than not, there's a number of documents that we're required to sign each time that we do meet. A number of those is the cemetery deeds. So I've asked that this be put on the consent agenda item for allowing this process to continue, but to authorize the town administrator to sign those deeds on behalf of the board. So I will move that item D on consent agenda.
Second.
And there's a second. Any discussion on that? Very good. Braccio,
Aye.
Healy,
Aye.
Kalenda,
Aye.
Shea, aye. Stivers,
Aye.
aye. All right. Again, E had been approved previously. I think we've made it through each of those. Mark, any other updates on impact of COVID-19?
No, I think that you pretty much have everything. The one thing I would suggest, Mr. Chairman, is that maybe at our June 2nd meeting, might be a good idea to have the recreation director in to be able to give you an update as to, where things are. I think that, there's a lot of moving parts over there. I think you've seen that the commission made the decision, not to hold summer camp this year. That was made, I believe, last night. So I think it'd be good to have him in to talk about what they're doing, how they're doing, and what their plans are moving forward to provide programming for the residents. So the suggestion, I think that June 2nd, it might be good to hear from him.
Okay, very good. Next item on the agenda is board and committee reappointments. And similar to the staff reappointments, this is a listing of members of boards and committees who are up for reappointment this year. Lori reaches out to folks to indicate whether or not they want to continue to serve on those boards or committees. So typically, again, what we do is present the list at this meeting and we'll take action on it under consent next week. I did want to get into a little bit of discussion. There were some notes with respect to a couple of boards and committees. So I just wanted to see what this board thought about those particular comments. First relates to the golf course committee. There are a couple of members of that committee that indicated that they did not want to be reappointed. And there's a question about whether we dissolve that particular committee, reconsider a new charge for that committee, or take other action. So I don't know if board members have had an opportunity to think about that, or if you want to talk about that more at our next meeting.
I have a comment on it, Brian.
Go ahead, Sam.
I attended, I guess, one of the last meetings of the golf course committee as they were wrapping up in terms of the course opening stuff. And there was conversation there around opportunity to refocus the committee from sort of a design construction support process to more marketing and getting better utilization out of the asset there. And several members commented that they were more focused on the former activity and were prepared to step down, which apparently has been happening here. And so it seems to me that there's still a real value in having strong citizen input in terms of working with the golf management company and the course management to continue to find ways to build business volume there and make that asset even more usable for members of the community. And I think that's the desirable focus. And I think there are likely some people who are interested in helping do that. So I would be in support of refocusing the charge to the committee and seeing if we can find other volunteers to step in and take that on.
And Mr. Chairman, just to Mr. Stiver's point, I think that was always the intention, is that you had this golf committee that was going to help to get the course through this transition and get it to where it is now standing on its own 2 feet again, and it's not, part of that public safety project. So I think that if you can find we've got to redefine what the focus is, instead of focusing on making the improvements and making sure that the clubhouse and golf operations is part and parcel of that whole public safety project. Now I think it's being that conduit between the town and the management company to try to find, as Mr. Stivers put it, the best way to get the most out of the asset that we have, and to make the board aware of any issues, any concerns, any things that improvements that we need to be thinking about, whether it's from a capital standpoint or from an operational standpoint.
Okay. All right, so we can consider that further at our next meeting. The next one, Main Street Working Group meeting. Mr. Healy, with your decision not to be reappointed, we're losing our
well, again, I like to represent my own position. What I said was, I didn't think the committee, the group, needed to exist anymore.
Yeah.
Little did we realize, Mr. Shea, that the Main Street Working Group was a springboard to the Board of Selectmen.
Exactly.
But there's 2 of us here now. Again, we haven't met in I think 2 or 3 years. If the group is going to continue in existence, even though it's not meeting, I'm fine getting reappointed. I just don't see its utility anymore. The project is very much out of our hands.
Yeah, quite honestly, I tend to agree. I think that we kept this group together a year ago, just in case. And I think it was at the start of construction, or construction was about to start. And in case Karen needed a group to fall back onto with any, input decisions. And, quite honestly, that hasn't happened over the last year. And there's certainly nothing stopping her from coming to this board, where there'll be at least 2 former members of that group. And who knows, maybe Mr. Boland and Mr. Boust will be elected to the Board of Selectmen as well in the future, the way things are going. So, so I could support dissolving that group actually. But, and again, I certainly want to recognize the efforts that everybody on that group put in, and particularly Sue and John, who've indicated, you know, willingness to be reappointed. So.
Another question, Brian?
Go ahead,
On
Sam.
the list, I noted the Conservation Commission
Okay.
issue there with Mr. Geyer's request for conditional reappointment.
Yep.
I'd be curious to know what people think about that one. I think that's an issue that's been bubbling for quite a while.
So my personal recommendation would be that we have a licensed site professional, an LSP, that we have engaged to assist us through that particular issue. And I am 100% in support of following the recommendations of the licensed site professional. And I personally am not interested in providing conditions to Mr. Geyer. I certainly would welcome his reappointment. I think he's been a tremendous member on the Conservation Commission. I appreciate his years of service on that commission and will gladly reappoint him, but will not do so with conditions.
I guess I think
Brian,
that's.
I will agree. I've liked Carl for years. I think he's a great advocate for, you know, the conservation, and so taking Carl's name out of it, I wouldn't look to support anyone who provided conditions to their appointment. So I would have to not, unfortunately, appoint Carl for, you know, if he intends on having that be a condition upon his request in the letter. And I wholeheartedly agree with you, Brian. There's avenues to make sure that recommendations are made and actions are taken, but it's not done through the appointment process.
Yeah, I also agree, Brian, with your comment that a question that I would be interested in is asking Mr. Geyer is if this board is willing to reinforce your comment, Brian, that we're prepared to follow the recommendations of the licensed site professional.
We have been following his recommendations. So I don't know that any additional action is needed. And certainly if it gets to the point where that licensed site professional needs to come before us to, you know, present, you know, results of findings, results of investigations, and recommendations on a path to move forward, then I'm certainly willing. I think it's appropriate for us to meet with that licensed site professional, but to tie a reappointment to the investigations that are ongoing is not something that I'm interested in.
Yeah, I'm not eager to do that as well. I guess my curiosity is Mr. Geyer convinced that following the licensed site professional is not what we've been doing and is not going to satisfy him? I'd be interested.
You know, I think that's for Mr. Geyer to decide, and I think that this board needs to, you know, personally, I intend to reappoint Mr. Geyer. And if Mr. Geyer chooses not to accept that appointment, that's Mr. Geyer's decision. If he chooses to accept it, then I welcome him back on the Conservation Commission.
Okay, thanks.
Without condition.
Correct. Any other comments on that?
No, I agree with you completely, Brian. The one thing I would do is, maybe Mr. Geyer is watching. If he's not, reach out to any of us. And I mean, Mr. Shea has indicated the perfectly, I think, reasonable position that the board has taken. But if you want to talk with us about it, fine. But conditioning an appointment on us doing one thing or the other is just not the right road for us to go down.
Okay. All right. Next comment was associated with the pilot committee.
Actually, Brian, can we go back to one? I just have a question.
Yep, go ahead, please.
So, historical, didn't we just fill one of those vacancies? Should that come off the list?
So the one we appointed went through 2020. Actually, yeah, the 2022 one. Correct,
Okay.
Mark? So that should come off the list, right?
That's it. Thank you.
Good catch. I missed that. Pilot committee. Mark, correct me if I'm wrong. This committee doesn't currently have anybody on it, does it?
Correct. No, it's empty.
Okay, so we can discuss next week whether we want to continue with that committee, dissolve the committee. Public Safety Building Committee, same question. I mean, that project is essentially complete at this point. You know, Mark, I don't know if they have any other lingering items to address for pay recs, or is everything closed out with the work on this?
At this point, the committee has granted the authority to myself and Mr. Malinowski to close out the project. So I don't believe they're meeting anymore. I think that Jason will at some point be forwarding the board one last set of minutes from the committee for you to approve. So that the committee doesn't need to meet again to approve a set of minutes and then have to, you know, have another set of minutes. So I think that they are fully prepared to be dissolved. Their project has been a great success, and now we can look to put them on other things.
Okay, very good. And the last was Town Property Review Committee. I don't know if it was your recommendation, Mark, to consider dissolving this group as well.
It's been empty for quite a while. I just, you know, it really was something that never got going, and unless there's, you know, there's people who are interested in, you know, in doing something with that, it may be best at this point to dissolve it, and then, you know, if at some point there's something we want to do or reconstituted as something else, then the board is fully able to do that. But we have a habit of creating committees and and just kind of letting them linger. So
And Mark, my inclination is that again, I don't know what they were, what the charge was, but it's probably something that could easily be sort of encased with the with our new capital committee that seems to be energized and doing a good job.
I agree.
I was just going to say that, Marty.
All right. All right. Any other comments, questions? All right. So that will be back on our agenda next week under consent. Lastly, public comment. Mr. Butka or Ms. Butka. I guess if you could just state your name, whoever it is, address for the record.
Hi, this is Susan Butka, 8 Hubley Lane in Southborough, chairperson for Youth and Family Service. I just wanted to say that I'm not sure that we can wait until January. I've talked to Sarah probably every other day, and this is going to get worse before it gets better. Not to be a downer, the Debbie Downer, but this is kind of a crisis situation. So I and our board would support having a full-time admin sooner than later.
Okay.
I see how hard they're working. I feel like I've said this to you before. I said it last year, and this is a completely different situation. So we had a couple of serious domestic abuse situations prior to this shutdown happening. And now I can't imagine what it's like to be locked down with a spouse that's either doing that to you or your children. So I appreciate all your time and effort on this. But again, this is just the tip of the iceberg, and I appreciate your support. And I really, really think that we need a full-time admin. And I really feel like we cannot share an admin with another department because of what they do.
Okay.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much. And I appreciate you holding on to make that comment. It's very insightful.
Thanks.
I'm sorry.
Any other comments?
Mr. Chairman, just one clarification.
Yeah.
The vote that the board took with regard to the budget and with postponing any new hires until January 1st of 21. Did that also include the additional hours for fire and for council on aging?
My motion was focused on new hires. It was not on additional hours.
Okay. All right, I just wanted to get some clarification for that when we pass that along to advisory so that they have an understanding. So the vote was simply on the hires. Okay, thank you.
Correct.
All right. With that, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. I'll second it. Braccio,
Aye.
Healy,
Aye.
Kalenda,
Aye.
Shay, aye. Mr. Stivers.
Aye.
Thank you very much, everybody. We are adjourned.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Night.
Stay
All
healthy.
right, thank you.